Today we're at the AECB conference and we are learning all about retrofit.
We've got 160 people here.
So it can be a real melting pot of shared ideas.
New technologies, new methodologies.
Help encourage each other.
Some amazing policy changes.
It's about learning. It's for people that really care and want to really decarbonise.
So I'm Trish Andrews and I work as the AECB CarbonLite training manager. And I work with my colleague Sarah, who's at the front here. And we are the AECB training team. That's it. It is us. But obviously we work with a lot more collaborators. We have people writing material for us, etc. But we're small but perfectly formed. And we're always looking to collaborate with more people. So as a training manager, I look after the whole suite of training offerings that we have, including developing new course delivery, but also looking at collaborating with people and also writing some of the content myself. I'm an architect, don't hold it against me, and I've spent the last 15 years in education because I couldn't get the work in the projects that I wanted to do or collaborate on, so I decided I'd teach about it. And actually, it's been an amazing journey because I've really learned that each and every one of us, and you've heard this before, all have a role to play and we can all do something. And education is amazing in relationship to that because I see the potential in so many people. It just makes me happy every day. That's why I get up. So, and I know we can make differences. So I sort of feel that when I began doing architecture in 1986, yes, I'm that old. I know you don't think I am, but it wasn't a word, retrofit. And even, as they, doing a project in an architecture school that concerned retrofitting an existing building was not architecture. They failed me. How dare they? But the thing is, I was ahead of my time, but I was ahead of the curve of what was happening, that we need to keep our existing buildings. And I did a new build for my project and I did pass, but I came away thinking, do I really want to do architecture? What have I learned? I don't know if I fit in. And what I found was I was divorced from the idea of designing to actually building. And why is that? And why have I come out after 5 years and I don't know how to build something that I've got in my head? So I decided to learn to build and I joined developing 2 timber frame buildings at the Centre for Alternative Technology as my year round, and it changed my life. Being able to get hands-on, to understand, what is a healthy material, what's not a healthy material, what is the way to design a building that builds in adaptability and longevity, and its impact is less. And I just thought, this is what I was meant to do. I've taken the long road, but I found it out. And I still believe that we're all on that journey at different levels. But the important thing is that we started it, and I know everybody here at the conference today is on that journey, some at different levels than others, but we all have a collective experience that we can share. And one way to do that is through training, which is why I'm so interested in looking at other courses that we could do. We've heard a lot earlier about skills gaps, about training the trainers, about looking at contractors and installers. And I think, we have to look at all of the roles that we need and think about how we can put training together. And you've got to start somewhere. The Centre for Alternative Technology just started as basically an experimental place, ended up opening as a visitor centre and, started the idea of changing the energy strategy in the UK, which was actually one of the first reports they wrote. And here we are today, and it's becoming more mainstream. I know it sometimes feels that it's not, but let me tell you, after 34 years, we are getting traction and it is changing. So along my journey, I decided that after reflecting on my degrees in architecture, I was fully qualified by then, but I was still unhappy with the way that we trained young architects from my own personal experience. And myself and a colleague in a pub on a beer mat decided to design a part 2 that surrounded sustainability, and that was the core ethos. It had to be through every single design project, everything that the students would learn. And I'm happy to say it's still going strong. And it's now 14, 15 years old, and we have some students, former students even in the audience, but here at the AECB conference, which is wonderful. But today you'll see in my talk that I'm actually quite selfish, and I'm going to talk about how we teach and how we train people and why we've got the courses that we have, because people all learn differently. They all learn at different levels. They all learn in different formats. And I think when you don't get that right either, it's not successful. And one of the things that we would like to encourage more and develop more with some of our partners is to actually have a more hands-on experience, because there's that connection of learning through doing rather than being taught at. And it's, like I said, with my experience, if I hadn't learned how to build, I wouldn't be in love with the building. So I needed to understand that and go through that. And I think what we'd like to do moving forward in our strategy is build more buildings that we have practical learning alongside theoretical learning. So that's just a little bit about me and my selfish interests. And I'm going to speak on Sarah's behalf, but she's the person who does the majority of the work in our department, but I tend not to tell her that all the time. So Sarah is our AECB training coordinator, and that means she coordinates everything, including me. But we met at CAT, and she was a student support officer there, and she basically did the programme administration for the majority of the offerings that were there, and we worked really well together. She is extremely inspiring, and when I came to the AECB and we had one course, I asked her, could she come along and help me develop a suite of courses? And she stupidly agreed with me. But she doesn't just oversee, supporting the students and the administration side of the courses for the AECB. She actually is very astute at designing learning platforms and knowing when things go wrong in the computer, while I'm shouting at the computer and she's saying, you've asked it to do the wrong thing. It's not the computer's fault. But she's also extremely adept at looking after internal quality assurance. And we really need that, because we do quite a lot of, almost 360-degree feedback of how we can always improve things, because you never get everything right all the time. And also it's important for us that we grow and we develop a better range of courses and that people have really good experiences. She also really enjoys doing voluntary work surrounding environmental causes and a lot of sustainable building short courses. And she's even done her own retrofit. So she's far ahead of me. I haven't done my own retrofit because I don't have my own house. But so we're both, quite different and have a polarity of our experience. But we bring that together and it seems to work. So I don't know if you know, how many people have actually done an AECB training? So a few. Okay, great. That's wonderful to hear. The others who are members or not members, why? Or do you want to learn more about them, or you'll learn in this session? So from the one course that we had, which was the original CarbonLite Foundation course, we've developed now a suite of 8 courses. Not bad in 4 years, really. And what we looked at when we were thinking about doing this was that people are at different levels in the journey, as I said, and we wanted to get people from the beginning of just being interested in the subject to those who are professional and advanced and want to learn a bit more. And hence, that's a roadmap. And you can see here, we've got various courses at various levels. So these are the suite of courses that I'm going to talk about just now. And they range from our original course right down to 2 courses that were launched, one last year and one this year. So we're still continuing to develop, and we're going to launch some more at the end of the year. So our original course, as most of you know, it was originally just called the CarbonLite Retrofit course. It's now called the CarbonLite Retrofit Foundation, because it's the foundation of everything. It's the largest course, and it was our original course, and many of you, I can see Bill at the back there through my steamy glasses, contributed to writing that course, and it's still really relevant today. It was actually mentioned as one of only 3 courses in the UK's Heat and Building Strategy in 2021, which is pretty amazing. We're not quite sure how that happened, but we think they were right to list it because it's an enormous course, but it's 130 hours, to be honest. So quite a lot of people just continually to renew their access to the course and keep it as a resource. And that's wonderful. It covers these 8 modules. So it starts off with basically what is the CarbonLite and what is the AECB philosophy about it. It looks at buildings in the UK climate. It looks at our housing stock, which is varied, some desperately needing changing, and all the different examples therein is vast, which is why retrofitting all of these is pretty difficult. It looks at energy in buildings for retrofit. A large module is obviously the module in moisture. As soon as we do anything, even change the doors or the windows, we start to affect the internal environment, as you all know, and it's important that we understand what we do, how we're doing it, and what effects it will have. We have case studies. We also have a section on building services for dwellings, and we also look at the cost of retrofit. So it's quite a large beast, as you can see, and even the moisture in buildings has 18 lessons in it. So it's, that's why it's 130 hours, and we give you a year's access, because I don't think even me can retain all the information that's in there. And as you know, in the construction industry, everything is changing so quickly and so fastly that it's hard to keep up with it. So what Sarah and I have been beavering away for the last year and a half is making it more bite-size. Okay? So what we're looking at doing is trying to let people have smaller pathways or bite-size chunks of learning that they can do rather than a 130-hour course, which people just can't do anymore. And the idea is that there'll be certain key pathways through it, or you can just choose to do 1 or 2 modules. Like our standards, it's about getting somebody to get their foot in the door about learning, and that's the idea of going bite-size. So some of our new modules, so it's gone from an 8-module course, what did I say about it being too big, to a 16-module course. It's not what I intended to do at the beginning, but it's how it's worked out, because the construction industry is a diverse subject, and lots of things we do need to take into consideration that we previously didn't, I think way back in 2016. The idea is that you'll do 2 core modules, and they will be the AECB retrofit philosophy. Why is our philosophy important? Why do you need to retrofit? So probably a lot of information that you already know, but maybe not a lot about the thinking behind the AECB. And then the second core module will actually be our standards and our certification process. We're putting that at the heart of our learning. So anyway, we're taking you on an AECB journey where you have to do the core modules before we'll let you do any of the other modules, and keeping you up to date with that, because obviously our standards will continue to hopefully adapt and change as necessary. The 3 core modules that we would like to look at are some of the other roles, I guess, within a project team for a retrofit. So we've got a new designer's guide to retrofit, and the lovely John Butler has helped us write that with John Gilbert Architects, and a little bit of help from myself. What not to do is my section. An assessor's guide to retrofit, and we're not just talking about, your average assessor who goes out. The key things that you need to do to get better standards, and the same with an installer's guide to retrofit. So they're sort of the 3 pathways that we're going to launch first in terms of trying to encourage people to do more bite-sized modules. And then we have other modules, which is retrofit scale, which people powered retrofit are helping us with. We're doing a short one in the past, 2035. Biodiversity, people think, well, why are you talking about that? We trash things when we start to construct. We don't look at what we've got and then protect it as we're doing things. So just think of the nature outside your building as something that you have to protect while you're doing your construction. a module on sustainable building materials. I won't let you guess who's going to help us do that. You might have been on a panel earlier. Retrofit investment appraisal. So again, the costing of retrofit and how that is changing and how there's lots of options out there. New AECB case studies, and you saw one earlier, the Prospect Hill Court, the 15-storey tower. And then building with timber. So looking at a bit more emphasis on the original timber module, which was extremely large and I needed a PhD to read. We've sort of made it bite-sized so you understand the principles, and then you can go on and do the second module should you wish. So which is slightly where you'll start to do an introductory module and then you might go into something that's a bit more advanced. So the course that we started last year was Understanding Building Physics. Now this is one of our entry-level courses. Building physics is fundamental to us implementing resilience in buildings. And after 13 years it took me to get my 3 degrees, I still didn't understand building physics. And I thought, that's crazy. And it affects everything. It affects your choices. It's so important that all of us in the construction industry understand it. And we wanted to make it bite-size. And I think the idea is that these types of introductory courses, we want to have no barriers. So they're interactive, live, online learning where there's no silly question. Okay, so you learn at your own pace. What you put in, you'll get back out in the knowledge. You can ask as many questions as you want. And it's a 10-hour course with 2 hours per week over 5 weeks. And usually we have quite a lot of engagement after each of the sessions. So there's usually an hour or 2 hours after the course where we have just open discussions with the students about what they've learned and do they understand the basics of it. Because if someone gives me an equation and I don't understand why I'm doing it, that's not going to stick in my head. It just won't. And I think a lot of people you need to understand the surrounding environment about why you are testing or monitoring what you're doing in a building. So these are the modules. So we looked at balanced systems. So we actually start from the solar system and how things are systems and how systems work within systems. We obviously look at thermal principles, ventilation in daylight, the key things, moisture in buildings, which, building physics and understanding that is really important. And then bring it all together in the end so that you have an introductory understanding of the criticalness of building physics. And that course has had a really good uptake. We're continuing it next year and we're hoping to grow it and maybe actually have people who are in colleges, starting university, or just general people interested in why building physics is important, not as a heavy subject. I think we've called it Understanding Building Physics, and it's under one of our criteria, and it's called Fundamentals with FUN being capitals. When you have fun, when you're learning, you retain it a bit more. And when you feel involved in it, like the practicals, and you can ask your questions and guide your learning with a tutor, it's much more successful. This year, we launched the PH Ribbon course. Now, again, it's a live online course, and there's lots of opportunity to talk about the software and try it out. And the person who you will be learning with is Tim Martell, who's the developer of the software. So there's no answer that Tim doesn't know. He's very level-headed, practically minded, and he helps you and takes you through the use of the tool, and you get instant feedback. The idea is that people who use PHPP, and there's been a lot of discussion about that as the best methodology, one of the best methodologies out there, is that, we're within the software of PH Ribbon, we're looking at collating that with the REBA Climate Challenge and LETI carbon standards, obviously, for embodied carbon and operational carbon. It's in line with RICS 2, and of course it's in line with our AECB standards. So we want to allow learners to understand how to make good decisions earlier, I suppose, in the process when they're looking at using PHPP. The course itself is 6 hours, 2 hours over 3 weeks. And there's 3 hours of assessments. This one you do get, there are tests. And the idea is that we're testing your critical understanding of how to use the software and get the right answers. And obviously those learners who have passed the course, we're now promoting them on a list of endorsed users on the AECB website. So we're trying to say, through the certification process, through understanding more of the software and tools and understanding that we help those that have done our training get out there and, be able to promote themselves to get jobs. So this is a CPD certificate in building energy modelling using PHPP, and we've been running this for 4 years. It's worth 50 Passive House Institute points, so that's half of your 5 yearly points. It's quite a long course. It's 100 hours over 6 weeks, and we have done it in collaboration with TU Dublin, and it's one of the modules in their MSc in Building Performance, Energy Efficiency and Design, and it's gone down really well. And basically it takes you through using a whole project from inception to completion and testing it through PHPP modelling, because quite a lot of people do perhaps a SEF course and maybe don't use that information straight away, and they come to that they've not done a whole building themselves, and the idea is to try and bridge that gap. Last year we launched the Approved Certification Group. Now it's interesting that people were talking about certification, particularly to do with the Welsh projects, and how people are wanting confidence in what we're doing, and that they can come back to you and building that confidence that we've lost over a series of mishaps and misfundings and not training people right previously. And the idea about this is that we have 56 certifiers and modelers in our first year, and there is an entrance exam. Basically, we put you through an entrance exam, give you a project and check that you understand how to do the standard, whether new build or retrofit or step to step, and that you can take that to a client so clients can have a bit of confidence in what you do. So this is one of the certificates that you would get or produce for our standards. And I don't know if anybody here has ever done any of our standards. There's one or two in the room who might have done. But the idea is that historically you were allowed to certify your own projects and put them up in the low energy building database, which we maintain. We're stopping that, and we now want certified people to do it and build some confidence in terms of people using said approved certifiers and modelers. And again, we're promoting them on their website and the things and projects that they've done, and hopefully generating that confidence in the AECB standards that will bring some robustness and people getting to know it a bit better. The AECB Retrofit Coordination course was the first course that we designed in terms of the PAS, and that's been going since 2022. We decided that at the beginning, lots of people didn't really want to be fully qualified retrofit coordinators, and we did work on the pilot project to set up the first retrofit coordination level 5. And so we did a standalone where you didn't actually get the level 5. And we had quite a lot of uptake to that. So we wrote the course in a way that just doesn't follow the PAS framework itself, but we talked a lot more about the other roles within a design team to make a project far more robust. And obviously our technical elements like looking at thermal bypass, moisture, etc. So a lot more written into it than that in terms of what's in the PAS framework. These are the modules that you need to do to gain a level 5. So we have written them all, and they all are adhered to that level 5. But as I said, they go into far more information about the things that we think are important: air tightness, ventilation, moisture, etc. And then last year, we did provide a level 5 because we realised that we do need a lot more people to be more risk averse when they're doing retrofits. And we have had 80 students go through it so far. And it's been a really good feedback loop in terms of how the industry is changing, how the PAS is changing and needs to change. Because it was quite difficult to try and write some training around a framework. They're very dry pieces of information and documents, and we don't get it right all the time. Hence, the PAS having to be updated quite often. But the idea is that you do a standalone, and then you're going to do a stage 2 where you do more assessments, a professional discussion, and you get your level 5 through AECB, which is the Birmingham City University awarding body. So these are the same modules, but what you do is further assessments and a further professional discussion. And there was a person who did a very original pilot on this, Colin Rice. I'm not sure he's here, but if you see his badge, ask him what it was like. Don't listen to me. He'll tell you. And I think the idea is that we want to not just do what adheres to the framework, because obviously we've got our own standards. And as you know, with retrofit, how do you compare retrofits today? How do you compare one retrofit as opposed to the next? You need a standard. You need a target. Otherwise, we're just comparing apples and oranges or pears, and we don't know why one is a good retrofit and why one isn't if we don't actually start looking at standards, which is what we're trying to bring together in the original foundation course, that people start to understand that you need targets, and you need to hit targets, and you need to also see if you're achieving them. Because how do we, make a comparison between one retrofit and the other when we've used different ways of doing it? So I was trying to do that in 10 minutes. I'm not sure if I have. I'm sorry if I've run through everything really quickly, but I have reduced my slides because we're going to have Lisa Pasquale to come up on the stage and talk about the retrofit coordination course and the PAS, her involvement in being the MIM of it, which I think lots of people don't even know, even although they used it all over the UK, she never get any accreditation for it. So I'm giving her it now. So please welcome Lisa to the stage.
That's the forward one. Okay. Right. So thank you. I'm Lisa. So I'm at the moment the CLR tutor. That's just supporting the students that are going through the program at the moment. And I've just gone through to update it a bit and bring in some new kind of information from various bits and pieces. I've got a background quite similar to Trish, that I'm trained as an architect, but I'm chartered as an engineer actually. And quite very ironically, similarly, was teetering on the edge of never graduating from architecture school. Because again, I didn't design a building my final year. I designed a system of navigation for people with sensory disabilities. And that's my dog. But that interest in basically how the human body becomes a human sensor and feels the environment around it in terms of vibration, temperature, air movement, sound, everything, became what kind of brought me into the field of sort of building performance and high performance buildings and environmental design, building physics, because ultimately it's how we design those environments and all the things that you really don't see that impacts, how we perceive the world around us. So I've got very dry slides, but it's very informative. The key updates to the CLR course. So there are basically two kind of big updates that have kind of come out. The main one is that we have a new approved document F, relatively new in the last kind of 18 months-ish. Yeah. So new approved document F, which is the guidance on how to design ventilation from in homes. And the removal of risk pathways from PAS 2035. Those are kind of the two big updates. So PAS 2035 has been updated. The very significant thing being the risk pathways have been removed. So the ventilation module for the new approved Part F that we've kind of updated the course content on. Now in England and Wales, there are significantly fewer approved options for ventilation strategies. So passive stack ventilation has been removed as an approved option. Single room heat recovery ventilators has been removed as an option, which is a little bit funny, which I'll explain in a minute. And PIV has now been removed. So none of those technologies can now be allowed in England and Wales. Bear in mind, for those of you like me who are up in Scotland, north of the border, what I have found is that a lot of the vendors who are pushing those technologies down in England and Wales and got their market cut off from them are now pushing them very, very hard up in Scotland to offload stock. So I've had neighbours come up to me going, someone's trying to sell me a ventilation system. Can you have a look at this? And I'm like, don't do it. So do be aware if you work in the other kind of devolved nations that those technologies are now creeping in higher volumes elsewhere. We now have revised air change volumes. We have revised information on radon risk and remediation based on some kind of new research that's come out. Revised methodology for specifying ventilation in retrofit homes. So this is part of what Approved Document F has done, is taken kind of the original PAS 2035 Annex C and basically formalized it and turned it into regulation, which is actually a very positive step forward for regulation. We also have kind of revised advice on air tightness and testing, again, because new technologies, new methodologies have become a lot more common in the last few years. And now Annex C is almost completely integrated into Approved Document F. There's very few kind of changes, the differences between the two. And the removal of the risk pathways from PAS 2035, that's been the most significant change to PAS 2035. I'll explain a little bit in a minute. So the removal of ventilation measures. So this is basically each one was removed for a kind of a different reason. So single room heat recovery ventilators have been removed mainly because of the risk of recirculating stale air. Generally speaking, most of these technologies have concentric intake exhausts, which mean you're basically pushing air out and pulling it in very close proximity to each other. The risk of that recirculating and basically just stuffing the stale air back into the house is just too high. Under PAS 2035, it is still listed as an acceptable solution if you have a room that can't otherwise be reached by an MVHR. So if you have like an annex or a conservatory or something that's just a bit too far off to run a duct to, it is listed in PAS 2035 as acceptable. But so far as I know, Part F takes legal priority in terms of compliance. So you do still have to have a fully compliant system. You just might have to, if you needed to add an extra bit of ventilation, you could do that. But that was a little bit of a grey area between those two, kind of conflicting a bit. Passive stack ventilation has been removed. To be honest, this was rarely a retrofit option anyway. And it's mainly just because the cost tends to be extremely high. You could get kind of more or less the same or more reliable air change rates for a lower cost if you did DMEV or CMEV. So that's kind of just a common sense thing that the technology has moved on a bit, and that's been kind of superseded out of the market. Positive input ventilation has been removed. Again, those of you who work in Scotland, be very careful because they are pushing that quite hard up in Scotland at the moment, like door-to-door salesman style pushing. And the main issue with this is it creates a really high risk of structural damage in retrofit scenarios due to the risk of basically pushing warm, moist air into parts of the structure that are cold, that then the warm, moist air will condense onto the structure, cause rot, mold, degradation, other things. And basically, we've just kind of learned from experience that actually pushing air and positively pressurizing a house is not a very good idea in a retrofit scenario. We do want to have a constant negative pressure pulling air out because that pulls the moisture out and it protects the structure for any kind of undue damage. There's been an increase in the minimum ventilation rates in Part F based on bedroom count, and basically, someone can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I'm quite sure that it's basically what they used to assume was that there was 2 people sleeping in the main bedroom. All additional bedrooms had 1 person sleeping in it. It now just assumes there's 2 people sleeping in every bedroom. So it just takes the most conservative number. So we have increased ventilation rates for basically everything when you're calculating the total volume of air movement. So this is my favorite part of Part F, which is the geekiest thing I've ever said. So what they've done with Part F, which is actually really quite genius, and I think Ian Moddett deserves several beers for having done this, is they've taken all the various retrofit measures that impact on air tightness, and they've listed them out as major and minor measures. So there are some of these measures that have a pretty minor impact on air tightness, like loft insulation. Doesn't really have a huge impact on air tightness. There are others that have major impacts on air tightness, like closing out a chimney, removing it, or blocking it up. That can have a huge impact on how much natural ventilation is going through the property. Sealing up a suspended timber floor can have a huge impact on the air permeability of the structure. So basically, by separating out the major and minor measures, what it then gives you the ability to do is decide whether you're in a category A, category B, or category C retrofit. And basically, depending on which category you're in, that then dictates the kind of level of ventilation you're going to need to supply to that property. So I believe category A, you can get away with kind of natural ventilation, intermittent extract fans. Once you're into category B and C, you're either looking at expertly designed natural ventilation or you're looking at continuous vent, either MEV or MBHR. And this honestly makes it a very kind of common sense way of approaching it. And the one thing to kind of bear in mind with this, though, is that you have to look at the building as a whole, not just the scope of works that you're undertaking at the time. So bear in mind that if, you've got a house that's from turn of the century, 1900s, they might have had upgrades to windows already. They might have had loft insulation already. They might have had some underfloor insulation already or some draft proofing already. You have to take all those previous measures into account and then consider your scope of work on top of it when you're looking at this. So it's not just your scope of works, it's everything that's been done to the property since it was originally constructed. Approved Document F now delineates between less airtight dwellings and all others. So the threshold that they've set for a less airtight dwelling is a design air permeability of higher than 5. And can we all just assume that I've said the full 5 cubic meters, because I can't repeat that equation 20 times in the next 10 minutes. So design air permeability of higher than 5 is a less airtight dwelling. An as-built air permeability of higher than 3. So either one of those, if you're at either one of those thresholds, you're a less airtight dwelling. For homes at this airtightness or worse, natural ventilation with intermittent extract is acceptable. So that's the threshold that Part F allows. Jumping to the third bullet point, Annex C of PAS 2035 actually has a higher standard. So it requires that the measured air permeability of 5 or less, not 3, then trigger the need for continuous vent. So basically, if you're in a funded retrofit where you're accepting government grant money, you have to comply with PAS 2035. You have a stricter requirement at which point it triggers the need for continuous vent. So it is a higher requirement than Part F technically requires. For any homes with better air tightness than what Part F decides is less airtight, you have to have continuous mechanical vent. And it can be either with heat recovery or without. Your option, it can be centralized MEV, centralized MBHR, or decentralized MEV. And the pathway update. So in PAS 2035, 2019 version, we had risk paths A, B, and C. And this was all covered in kind of module 4 of the course. So risk path A, B, and C, the intent behind it was the more complex the retrofit, the higher the risk path. The higher the risk path, the higher the level of qualifications that the individuals were delivering it needed to have. The more testing you might require, the more in-depth surveys you might require, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we kind of got not too far into implementing the path and realized there was actually quite a fundamental problem to that, which was that the risk path is defined by the scope of the retrofit and the underlying structure of the building. And that includes, the qualifications that are required of the assessor to go out and assess that. Their qualifications change depending on if you're risk path A, B, or C. The problem is you can't decide all those things until you sent an assessor out. So we were running into an issue of sending assessors out, assessing a building, realizing we were on pass C and having to send a different assessor out and do it a second time. And basically there was all these kind of catch-22s that we were constantly having to redo work because we were bumping up and down risk paths, and this got very expensive very quickly. So basically it's been decided that the risk paths were kind of just too complex to work in practice. They were kind of causing more problems than they were solving. So they've been simplified quite a bit. So we've updated module 4 to explain the kind of modified and simplified methods that kind of account for these changes. The PAS now requires improvement option evaluations, medium-term retrofit plans, monitoring and evaluation plans for all retrofits now, with the exception of distressed heating replacements. The requirement for retrofit design has a lot of added detail and nuance, and it's also been simplified and streamlined for a few clauses. So some of the design requirements in the previous version got a bit convoluted and a bit complex, and it's much simpler and much clearer now. So we've kind of updated all that kind of information for you. There are a few changes on the treatment of historic and protected buildings. So the previous version of the PAS had some really onerous requirements. If you were in a protected building or conservation area, some historic and traditional constructions that were creating, again, unnecessary work. So things like we were replacing boilers in, grade 1 listed buildings and having to do air pressure tests, and it was just pointless, stuff like that. So all of that's been kind of removed and simplified so that actually we're only pressure testing homes that had a significant amount of physical work done to the fabric. So not so much about services. And that's it. That's kind of the main updates we've done.
I see. So. Well, I think if you'd like, we could take some questions. They say you might be needed this, but and also please share your ideas with us. We do have a feedback form at the table at the back, and we are really interested in just having your views about training, about ideas of things that you think are really important that we can look into further. Pass that back. So I think we've got a question over here.
Hello. Yeah. Jack Allen, we do a lot of air testing and Part F, and have been doing Part F for about 7 years and doing it following the requirements. We quite often do it and fail them post retrofits because they're not in line with Part F, and people are just doing spreadsheets and doing essentially fan testing. And then our clients are, oh, it doesn't fail because an electrician will pass it and test it themselves. So it's great to see someone saying the actual rules of it, because we've created our own spreadsheet and we've created our own retrofit assessment section with it on our own app, which actually goes through Part F requirements and fails most things. But building control seem to accept anything they're given and don't understand anything. And so for us, people are, oh, we're not getting them back because they're really anal and will just fail us again. So like until is there a way of sort of upskilling not only building control but also the architect or the lead designer? Because I did one the other day and it had a single room heat recovery, which is not allowed, and another person who was advocating PIVs, saying how wonderful they are. And I was like, both of them fail. I was like, sorry, we're just going to fail them. And then so we've sent them failure reports, and I don't know what they've done, gone and got someone else who might pass it. But sort of what's being done to make sure like that the ISP gets regulated.
Oh, you need to take that on.
Well, one of the things that we do is that the PAS isn't perfect, and we all know that. And there's a long way to go to, get us to all be on the same level of how we should be looking at retrofit, at least the same risk register and, what the outcomes would be. What we tend to do in the course is we run some retrofit cafes, and we ask some retrofit coordinators to come in and discuss some of these subjects. And then obviously we try and give that feedback to DESNES and the people that are writing information, and also trying to highlight the problems, because for a long time we've just done business as usual, and we know SAP hasn't worked as well, or we know this hasn't worked as well, and we've just gone along with it. So I think as a membership, and also as an organisation that is lucky enough to teach, these ideas about having these discussions could lead on to us then having, a course for planners and building officers, or, whoever's looking after a portfolio of the retrofits for whoever, that we start to change from within. Try to change policy is a big thing, but to be honest, we've had an inside door, with our foundation course, etc. So the more that we discuss it, and the more that we collectively think this and this X, Y, and Z needs to change, and we vocalize that and we put it into our training and we start, sharing that message, then I think things will change. And, we're much further on than we were 5 years ago. We didn't have the past 5 years ago. I think when we did the pilot, it was 2018 to 2019, and these roles didn't exist. And, I'm not going into the discussion about, it was originally an architectural role and this is a brand new role as a different project manager. And are they going to understand the sums? We've got a long way to go, but we've started the journey. So I think some of the areas that you've highlighted there show some of the pitfalls. And I really think that, being able to hire an independent, building officer is maybe not the best way to go. But training, every local authority is now having their own development plans. They're having their own local energy partnerships. They're on board now, and it's now getting them to train their staff, isn't it?
I would kind of add to that I've gone through as much of the Grenfell report as I could stomach. And one of the key things that came out of that was basically absolutely condemning the fact that we've privatised basically everything to do with building safety. And I'd like to hope that something comes of that things start to shift around. That might be a very optimistic hope. But yeah, I mean, I've got I did a bit of a retrofit on my flat, and I am my local building control officer's least favourite human being, because I basically pointed out all the various ways he was completely incompetent. I really recommend the video that is created on your flares. I mean, thanks. It's on local website. Yes. Does that include the wine rack that comes out the floor? Because that's now what I'm very well known for, apparently.
Hi, Mark Elton. I'm also an architect, started in 1986. What a great generation. I'm still doing kind of architecture and retrofit, and my retrofit journey kind of preceded the Retrofit for the Future competition. I happened to present about a deep retrofit that I'd just done just before the government started talking about that scheme, and ended up getting involved in 12 out of the 80 or whatever. And the whole idea of a retrofit coordinator came out of the back end of that, when so many of them went wrong because there wasn't that consistent person from start to finish. And the retrofit I worked with the Retrofit Academy on their sort of course early days, and they were nearly combined, these two courses, but they separated out. The point I'm trying to make, though, is that retrofit coordinator is very much a project management role. So for me, as an architect specialising in retrofit, it's become not something I really want to do in my career. The Retrofit Academy have just recognised that, and now started a training course for retrofit designers, targeting architects and all those people who get part F wrong and part B wrong and part L wrong. So I wasn't sure whether I saw anything in your big long list at the beginning specifically targeting the retrofit designer role, because there are all these new roles of assessor, coordinator, ice cream maker. They all developed, but the original people doing this were architects and retrofit designers, and they seem to have missed out again on the training regimes now. So what are you offering for architects in your suite of training?
Well, what we're trying to do in the bigger picture, to be honest, is get that level 5 knowledge within architectural education. So you don't have to do another level 5 after you've done 7 years. It's just crazy. And also, buildings are complex. You learn throughout your life how difficult they are to deal with. And for someone to come in who may have a background of a level 3 in, something related to building, it's very difficult to understand how that person will be able to implement that role. Because it takes years of knowledge, and we saw earlier BDP's project for River Clyde Homes, a 90-unit project. Understanding the complexity in that as a project manager who's not done a lot of construction is bound to fail if you're relying on your other roles. what we have done in original pass course is we have brought in the role of how important the designer, the assessor, the installer, as well as the project manager. So we didn't just stick to the RC role in our course because we just thought it takes a team, like it takes a community to raise a child. It takes a team, a project team, to produce a good project. And you'll see that in our bite-sized foundation course, we're now looking even in more depth at those roles. So we have a designer's guide to retrofit, and that is all about the complexity of retrofit, different things you have to do. There's a little bit of a playbook with, in terms of some of the really critical junctions and what you need to understand. And it's aimed at the designers to take back that understanding that they need to, with the level of assessing that has been done and know what needs to be done, that they work more together. And it's not just somebody ticking the boxes. And I'm not saying that is, something that we shouldn't be looking at in terms of quality management, but the people understanding how the building works and developing and designing how it works is really critical. You need all the team, and we feel that the PALAS doesn't really do that the way that it's written just now and the way that some of the courses that are level 5 out there are, but more importantly, trying to get it into architectural education so that architects come out with this understanding and can project manage straight away.
So the original retrofit coordinator qualification, it was like 10 years ago. The idea behind it was supposed to take professionals, so surveyors, architects, engineers, and upskill them at retrofit so that they were more specialized. And that was the whole intent behind it. And basically, through various commercial pressures over the years, that kind of driven down to more of a technician level. So the retrofit coordinator became a bit less, and then the designer role got kind of tacked on top. And the idea, again, behind that was, well, you only kind of need a coordinator. If you're just replacing some doors and some windows, you don't really need an architect to supervise that. So, okay, we'll let the simpler ones go ahead without architect oversight. Once you get to the more complex multiple fabric measures coordinating, then you're on the path B, path C. You then need an architect or someone more qualified to step in. So that was the kind of concept behind it. But yeah, eventually it was just kind of realized that was way more complex than basically the industry could handle. So I do think that it was a mistake, like going back kind of 8 years ago, to start watering down the coordinator course to the point that it was more aimed at DEAs than it was at professionals. Like, I personally think that was kind of a bad move on the way the industry moved, because I do think it should really be professionals that are leading this and are kind of the ones at the forefront. And kind of having that technician level person is quite good. If it's the one on the ground just kind of dealing with some day-to-day thing, that's fine. But in terms of setting the vision and setting all the coordination and the key elements, to me, that still is an architect's role. So I personally am not overly keen on the way that they're delineated at the moment. Well, that's just my opinion.
Okay, I think we've run out of time. There's a little birdie in my shoulder. But if you get any more questions or want to discuss anything more training-wise, please come and see us at the Jays. Thanks very much.